We're excited to be here. We've been doing a lot of work here the last couple weeks and the last couple months, in fact, getting a lot of things ready for the UC. And so we've got a lot of new things, I think, to share with you guys this week. This session is about the Living Atlas of the World. How many of you are active users of the Living Atlas of the World now? Looks like a few of you. You probably are using it and aren't really realizing it yet, because some of the things that are built into ArcGIS Online are parts of the Living Atlas of the World, and we'll get into that. My name is Dean Kenzak. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Bernd Zakowski. We're both part of the Living Atlas team based in Redlands, California. And we're here to talk about giving you an introduction overview of the Living Atlas of the World. So I'll start kind of from the very beginning, but go through this pretty quickly, and then we'll dive into some details on the content that's available through the Living Atlas of the World. But for the past 2 or 3 years, we've liked to talk about this as ArcGIS now includes a Living Atlas of the World with maps and layers and apps and tools from Esri, and then thousands of other contributors around the world who are sharing their work. The Atlas is living in the sense that it's constantly changing. Every day new content is added to the Living Atlas of the World, and existing content is updated. In fact, some things are updated as frequently as every 5 minutes, like our live traffic data. And it's organized. It's an atlas in the sense that it's an actively curated set of content that's organized into various themes, many of which you see there on the screen, like basemaps, imagery, demographics, transportation, and so forth. The content in the Living Atlas is coming from multiple sources. A lot of it's coming from Esri, although not the majority of it, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. But there's also a lot of content in the Living Atlas that's coming from our partner community. A lot of them are here this week. Organizations like NAIP, Michael Bauer Research, Digital Globe, HERE, TomTom, many others are providers of content into the Living Atlas. In some cases, they're doing that through Esri. For example, HERE is licensing data to Esri that we make part of our StreetMap and our geocoding services. In other cases, they're providing that directly, such as Michael Bauer Research has just released some really interesting consumer segmentation data through the ArcGIS marketplace that's built into the Living Atlas as well. And then increasingly, content in the Living Atlas is coming from our user community, organizations like your own, perhaps, who are creating authoritative content for their communities. These could be national mapping agencies, or state governments, or NGOs, or small commercial organizations who are building and maintaining content and want to make that content publicly available to users. So I've highlighted a few good examples of this. One in the US is NOAA. NOAA is responsible for providing a lot of weather data for the United States and for the rest of the world, in fact. And they've built some pretty powerful platforms on which to deliver that data. And they deliver it through NOAA.gov websites, but they also have taken a lot of the individual services and registered them as layers in ArcGIS Online, and then promoted them through the Living Atlas of the World. So now you can access real-time weather data that's hosted by NOAA, and it's right at your fingertips through the Living Atlas user experiences that we'll show in a little bit. And then there's many other examples of users publishing layers, web maps, story maps, custom applications, and so forth. And the goal of this is for all of us, all of you, to have access to the richest, most authoritative, best maintained content in the world that's being published by many of us as GIS professionals. Another key concept with the Living Atlas is it's not meant to be one user experience for accessing it. It's not meant to be where you go to one single website and that's your experience, like you might have with other online mapping products. In this case, it's meant to be embedded into various parts of the ArcGIS platform. So of course, it's built into ArcGIS Online. You can access the content in multiple ways, and Bernd will show a couple examples of that. It's also been built into ArcGIS Enterprise. So if you're an enterprise user, you have an on-premise portal of your own, a lot of the content from the Living Atlas has been replicated into Enterprise. And the way we've done that is by taking a subset of the Living Atlas content, a lot of it from Esri, and taking the items that refer to that content, such as live traffic. And we have an item that gets deployed within your Enterprise portal environment. But the data itself is not copied into the Enterprise in that case. It's referring back to the online services. So you're still getting the benefits of all the live updates that are happening to the content. You just have a local reference to that content within your portal. So you do need to have an internet connection if you want to take full advantage of the Living Atlas from your enterprise. But we also do have some other maps that you can download and host locally within your enterprise too. We also do have a Living Atlas of the World website. I think Bern will show that briefly here in a minute, where you can browse content from the Living Atlas. So all of the content in the Living Atlas is available through this website, and it's also the place you'll go if you want to contribute content. And at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then it's built into other ArcGIS apps. Desktop apps like Pro have built-in user experiences for accessing the Living Atlas, and then other apps like Explorer for ArcGIS can also bring in content from the Living Atlas. So with that, I might just pass the baton over to Bern, and he can show us a couple examples of this.
All right, so I'm going to begin here at my ArcGIS Online organization. And recently what we did is we added a new tab under Content. And when I visit that, you'll see that there is now a Living Atlas tab there. So this is direct access to Living Atlas content. So I can choose that tab, and I have a nice listing of Living Atlas content. I can sort those in different ways. I can also view them in different ways. And I can also search through these. Now, something new that was added to ArcGIS Online, I think 2 releases ago, last release, was categories. And categories are really, really cool. You can set these up for your organization. You can make up your own categories. You can use some standard categories that you've done. You assign content that you have to those categories. The Living Atlas team has done the same thing. And these are Living Atlas categories that we see here. So if I'm looking for something that deals with the environment, I can open up that category and I can use that as a filter on the content that is in the Living Atlas there. Anytime I find something, I can click the title to view its details. You can see these little badges here. Let's go ahead and open up one of these and look at the details. These badges are indicators of the type of content that it is. These are marked authoritative, so they're curated by Esri. They're marked as authoritative. They are curated in the Living Atlas, and this means it's subscriber content, which means you need to have a login, or someone needs to publish an app on your behalf if you're a public user to be able to access this content. Let's begin by, let's go ahead and clear my filters and let's just go ahead and search. So say for example, I'm interested in looking for content from Utah. A lot of the content in the Living Atlas is contributed by the user community and it's curated by Esri staff. So here I found black-footed ferret. Let's go ahead and open that up. And let's go ahead and add it to a map. And notice here there's some really good documentation. These items are well detailed, so you can learn a lot about those. Now I'm in the map viewer, and I also want to work with Living Atlas content. First, all the base maps are of course Living Atlas content. Even the World Geocoder, that's considered part of the Living Atlas. But I can come here to add, and I can browse Living Atlas layers. And I just showed you the different categories that is expressed here. So here's all the different categories of things that we can search for. So let's look for, and there's also regions, right? So you can choose your region and so forth. Let's look at environmental data, and let's go ahead and look at habitat. So I've browsed down through the categories, and I found something I'm interested in, forest type. I can add it directly to the map here. I can also remove it from the map. If I want to learn a little bit more about it, I can click the title, and this is a little kind of compressed view of the item details. If I find something that I want to use as a base map, I come down here and click Use as Base Map. So everything that you need is right there on that side. So we can easily browse Living Atlas content from the Content tab or from within your map. Another place we can go is the Living Atlas of the World website. And some of you might not be familiar with this, but this is your one-stop place to go for anything and everything Living Atlas. On the main page, you'll find links to the latest blog posts, links to what's recently been published. Living Atlas is continually evolving, so there's always updates to imagery and other things. Major things are released in conjunction with an ArcGIS Online release, but this homepage is a great place for you to go to learn about those things. We have a filter for the blog, so you can roll up all the Living Atlas related blogs there. We also have some interesting apps that you can take a look at here. Often people don't think of apps as part of the Living Atlas, but indeed there are a number of apps which work directly on our data, and lots of our users, contributors share things. But another place we can go to begin searching for Living Atlas content is here, the browse area. So again, I can type in a keyword, try Utah again. Again, we're searching the same Living Atlas, the same content. I can view that in different ways here, and I can sort by relevance, by date. I can also apply some different filters here if I like. For example, if I'm looking for imagery, I can choose multispectral. So this will filter just for the multispectral imagery. I could also look for multispectral imagery that deals with the environment. So you can see along the top is a sort of a little breadcrumb which explains kind of what I'm looking at, and I can adjust these and I can clear them. And this is a great way to start looking for content. And I can begin building a web map from here as well. For example, let's look for layers. And here was that black-footed ferret data. And again, from here, I have a number of different options. I can favorite that if I would like. And I can also go ahead and open that directly up into the map viewer. So you can use the Living Atlas website as a place to go to begin authoring your maps. Finally, I'll show how this works in ArcGIS Pro. So here I am in ArcGIS Pro. Of course, all of the Living Atlas base maps are built in. You sign in with ArcGIS Pro, so your organization's base maps are represented here, and whatever is available for members of your organization ends up being shown on the map. If I want to search for additional data from the Living Atlas, it's add data to the map. And as I look down the list here, here's Living Atlas content. And once again, here are those categories that I was talking about. So I can choose the category of data that I would like. And once I find what it is, I can go ahead and I can add it to the map that way. So takeaway points are the Living Atlas, lots of ways that we can begin exploring and finding data. All of that is built into the ArcGIS ecosystem.
Cool. Thank you, Bern. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of the Living Atlas and how you can access it. Now let's dive in a bit to the content portfolio. So at Esri, we have a team of people in our development group that are responsible for building out Esri's contributions to the Living Atlas and to other products that we make available. And they're organized around some of the same themes that we're talking about for the Living Atlas. So we have a base map team and an imagery team and so forth. So we're going to go through these a little bit, starting off with base maps and give you some updates. So most of you are probably well familiar with our base maps. They've been available for about a decade now. We have a range of different base maps in different styles that range from very neutral background maps like our light gray canvas to rich foreground maps like our topographic or imagery maps. One of the new things in the last couple years is we now have both raster tile versions and vector tile versions of our base maps. In the past, we just talked about base maps being delivered as tile services, which are optimized for performance. And vector tiles are the same way, but they have some added advantages to them. These are a list of some of the key advantages of our vector base maps. We have many more styles available, so you can have more options to choose from. If you'd like to create your own style, you can easily customize the vector base maps, turn layers on and off, change symbology, and so forth. They look really good on high-res displays like your iPhone because they're rendered client-side. They're easier to update because the caching is much faster than it is with raster tiles. They're a much smaller footprint. To give you a sense of that, our entire world base map in vector tile format is about 30 gigabytes currently. Our street map alone, one of our raster tile maps, is about 15 terabytes. So almost 1,000 times larger in terms of size are our raster tiles. And then they can be projected on the fly. So lots of advantages of them. If you'd like to take advantage of them, I think Bern will show you in a second how you can do that. So With our December release last year, we introduced version 2 of our vector base maps, and we also enabled organizations who are using the Esri base maps as their default base maps to configure them for their organization. And that's an option, which I know you were able to show, Bern, that's available to you through the organizational admin tools. We also provide access to our global coverage of data. So now in our vector base maps, we have large-scale data for every part of the world using best available data from commercial and community sources. I think I'll switch it over to you, Bern, to show that real quick before I move forward.
All right. So I think the first thing we want to take a look at is how to set up the vector base maps in your organization. So I'm an admin in this organization. So when I click the Organization tab, and move on to Settings. Underneath Map is the base map gallery. So the way these things work is a group, well actually let me take you through this step first. By default, it's the Esri default. If I want to switch to all of the Esri vector base maps, I just go ahead and check that box. Now what I've chosen to do in my organization is something a little bit different. What I've done is I've created a group, and I do a lot of kind of color coding to make it easy for me to find things. Groups are a basic building block for any organization, and here I've created a custom base maps group. And in this group I've populated it with base maps that are a combination of Esri as well as default base maps. So I can substitute this group into my organization, and I can use a combination of both. And the way I do that, again, is I go back to Settings, and I go back to that Map tab, and I choose the group that I want to populate that, and here it is. It's the Esri raster and vector base maps combined. It's a little group I made. I chose the base maps that I wanted, and once I click Save, then that group will become my base map gallery as well as the base map gallery for any member of the organization. If I want to find and add some things, what I can do is I'll search for keyword vector and search for groups. And I'll search outside my organization, and this is how you'll find some of the Esri vector base map groups or vector tile groups, and I can find something that I like that might not be in the Esri defaults, and I can go ahead and click it, look at the title, and to add that to my group now, I just click Share, and I want to add that to my combined raster and vector base maps group, and click OK. So you can browse around, find the vector base maps you want to use, add it to a group, set that up as your organization default.
Perfect. So if you're interested in using the vector base maps, there's that easy button, use the Esri default. Most orgs are. Check that box and save that, and you're good to go with our vector base maps, or you can create a custom gallery like Bern demonstrated. Another key thing we've been working on with vector base maps is localization. One of the asks we've had for a few years is to localize our base maps. And I mean localize kind of in two contexts. One is the language. So if you're a French-speaking person, for example, and your browser is set to French as your language, or your organization is set to French as your preferred language, in ArcGIS Online we haven't been able to localize your base map. So the name of the map would be localized, but not the content of the map. With this latest release of V2, we now are supporting localization. And with the June release of Online that came out 2 weeks ago, we introduced 6 additional languages that are available in our vector base maps now, and I'll show an example of that. Another aspect of localization is getting the right content for the map. Not all countries agree on borders and place names. In some places it's very important that the borders and place names be rendered a certain way. With vector tiles, you have the ability through the styling of the map to control that. So we've built into our vector tiles the ability to control the treatment of disputed places, like the borders between countries or names that have differing views throughout the world. So you don't have to build separate maps for that. You can just style our existing maps to get these local views of the map. We also have introduced recently a vector style editor. Our developers team has made a tool available that you can use through your web browser to quickly restyle our vector base maps, and we'll look at that here in a minute. So let me bounce out to my slides. And just show you a couple examples. So in ArcGIS Online with our vector-based maps, we have 9 core styles of maps that are available. Some of these are very familiar, like our streets or topographic or the light gray canvas. Some of these are new styles like streets at night and navigation that are available. The interesting thing here is that these are not separate map services. They're actually all hitting the exact same set of vector tiles. It's just different styles that are being applied on the fly to these maps. So think of it like a style sheet on a website. The content is the same, the style sheet is different. And so we can develop not just 9, but hundreds or thousands of unique styles. In addition to those core styles, we have a number of what we think of as custom or creative styles. You can see a few here, a modern antique where we have hand-drawn symbols for trees, a mid-century modern, a colored pencil map that makes it look like somebody hand-drew the whole map in colored pencil, a newspaper-style map. One that we introduced a few months ago that's quite nice is a map called Nova. And this is kind of a futuristic looking, kind of a James Bond-inspired map. And it's got the full levels of detail. So if I go to, say, Petco Park, you can see all the richness of the data that exists in the map around the convention center area, just kind of uniquely styled with custom sprites, which are symbol sets. I think another one I'll show real quickly is one that we introduced recently. Bern showed in the plenary charted territories. I'll let Bern show that off in more detail if he wants. I mentioned localization. This is just showing a few examples of the map. So this is our navigation map, and you can see in the titles of each of the maps the names in the languages. So this is Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, and Russian, but you can see the labels on the map. The country names, the city names have all been localized into those respective languages. So we've done 6 already. With the September update, I think we'll do 6 or 7 more, and then over the next few months we'll be rolling out localization to all the supported languages in online, which I think is 37 at this point. Bern, do you want to show the style editor? Or
sure.
Something else?
Alrighty, so here's one of the more recent additions to the vector style base maps. This is OpenStreetMap. I think everyone's been familiar with it. This has been a part of our base map gallery for a long time, but it's been the raster tile version of the OpenStreetMap. New is this vector tile version. And right away when I began using this, I could see the crispness of the labels, because they're not tiles, right? They're actual vectors, and the crispness of the features. Another thing, which actually I think it's one of my new favorites now, is this one called Charted Territory. And this reminds me exactly of a wall map I remember from grade school. That got me excited about geography, but more than that wall map, this has got some amazing cartography as we zoom in. It's really beautiful. And I'll zoom into this part of Switzerland, and as I keep going, we'll see glaciers and things like that. So really great detail, and you can see all of this really performs well. Now, suppose I want to edit one of these, or even edit one of your own vector tile layers. We have this new application, which is called the Vector Tile Style Editor. And I'll look at all of the Esri base maps, and I'll choose one. And let's do this charted territory, since we just looked at that. Let's go ahead and select that style. It's like, as Dean said, it's like selecting a style sheet for a website, right? It's the same features, we're just representing the styles in different ways. We have a couple of different views here in different locations, so I can get an overview of what this currently looks like, and I can do things like edit one of these colors, so I'll choose the green. We'll do something really crazy here, and we'll make it bright red. Didn't see too many changes there. Let's go ahead and add some more. Oh. Actually, yeah, there we go. This will be really crazy here. But you can see I've changed the style there. Let's generate some random colors, and we'll apply that. So you can see it's really easy to edit the style of the map. And this includes turning layers off or on, or adjusting labeling and things like that. So we encourage you to use this to make your own style base maps.
Cool. So hopefully that gives you a sense. So that's a really powerful tool. Actually, our cartographers back in Redlands are using that tool as a way to start designing new maps. And in fact, they're actually using that random generator. Sometimes they click that 5 or 6 times and they see something unexpected that they kind of like, and then that might inspire them to do something pretty creative. So Bern alluded to an OpenStreetMap. I wanted to add a little detail on that. So as Bern mentioned, for many years we provided access to the OpenStreetMap base map in ArcGIS Online. And to do that, we've been referencing a service that's hosted by the OSM Foundation, and it's a raster tile service, and it's been very popular with our users. In many parts of the world, it's the best available data. One thing we've wanted to do is provide a vector tile equivalent of OpenStreetMap that has all the benefits of vector base maps that I described using the OpenStreetMap data. So just this week, we've introduced in beta a new OpenStreetMap vector base map that's available for you to access. It will provide access to a vector base map that's purely based on OpenStreetMap data. It's a map that we've authored in Pro and is hosted in ArcGIS Online. And we're going to be updating it every 2 or 3 weeks with the latest available OpenStreetMap data because that's changing quite frequently. And the good news is that this map will be freely available to all ArcGIS users. In fact, it'll be freely available to any user or developer who would like to build it into their map or application. No authentication required, no credits or anything like that. A freely open map. So as I mentioned, it's now in beta release. It'll probably be in beta release for a couple months. Around September, we're planning to end the beta, and then we'll integrate it into the base map galleries that Bern was showing earlier, so it'll be easily accessible to everyone. So let me just show you real quickly. Bern showed a little preview of this, but this is the place where you can go. There's a group in ArcGIS Online you can search for called OpenStreetMap Vector Base Map. If you go in that group, it'll describe the map, and then it has 3 items. There's a web mapping application, a web map, and then a tile layer. So what I'm going to show you here now is the web mapping application, but it's just referencing the map, which is in turn referencing the layer. So here's the app. It has a little preview on the map. It tells you a little bit about it, and then you can click through the Explorer, and then you can enter a place, like if we want to go to, I'll just go to Petco Park again. So you can go anywhere in the world and see the data that's available, and it's a rich, detailed base map taking advantage of all the content from OpenStreetMap and a lot of the cartographic capabilities as well. So let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about imagery. There's also a lot that we've been doing in the area of imagery. Our flagship imagery map is our World Imagery Base Map. In fact, it's the most popular map that we have in the Living Atlas. We see sometimes over 500 million requests per day to this image map alone in ArcGIS Online. So lots and lots of requests. This is a map that's built from a variety of best available sources. In the last couple of years, we've been doing major updates to the imagery base map. I think 2 years ago, we announced during the plenary a partnership with Digital Globe, where we have access to their global imagery for a couple of their flagship products. And in the last little less than 2 years, about 15 months, I think, we've updated about 175 million square kilometers of imagery with Digital Globe content. In addition to that, we've also updated the map with content from our user community. Many of the organizations like yourselves, city governments, counties, national mapping agencies are acquiring imagery and would like to see that imagery reflected into an online map, but they may not have the infrastructure to do that. So we have a community maps program through which users can share that imagery with Esri, and we do the processing and publishing and hosting of that and then deliver that out. So there's dozens, in fact hundreds of examples of that in the imagery map. We also offer some alternate views of our imagery map that are optimized in different ways. Our default imagery map is optimized for currency for the most part. We're trying to show the latest imagery, but some use cases require something different. So last year we introduced something called Clarity, which is an alternate view of our world imagery map that's optimized to reveal kind of the image quality, the clearest imagery, the most accurate imagery, the highest resolution imagery perhaps, that you can use within your application for certain use cases. Things like data collection may be best served with a service like Clarity. We also have a service called Firefly, which is quite nice and been very popular since it was released about a year ago. Firefly provides an alternate view of imagery that's designed to be used more as a neutral background layer. So if you want to overlay data on an imagery map, you want the kind of richness of the feature information in imagery, but you don't want all the color conflict with the data that you're overlaying it with. You might want to choose Firefly. So at the small scales, we've desaturated the imagery. So we've removed most of the color, so it's kind of monochromatic. So you can overlay other feature layers and have them really pop on the map. And then as you zoom into the map, we gradually reintroduce the color. So as you get to the larger scales, you're back looking into a full color representation of the imagery. And then more recently than this, we've introduced a set of Firefly symbols into ArcGIS Online, which make it really easy to take your point data and apply Firefly symbols and get a really stunning effect with the map. And there's a link to a blog there that you can find that does a really good job of explaining the value of Firefly cartography. Another service that we've introduced just in the last 2 weeks is something that came out of a feedback that we had last year and the year before at this event, where we had a lot of users saying things like, well, it's great that you guys are updating the imagery. I really need the updated imagery, but in some cases, I want to use the imagery that was available previously. Maybe it's because they had done some data collection on that imagery and their features align perfectly with that imagery and they wanted to continue using it for that purpose. Or maybe it was for some research project they had. They wanted to maintain the source of the data they used for the research. Various use cases. So we're now introducing something new, World Imagery Wayback, where we provide access to over 80 versions of our World Imagery map going back about 5 years. And that number of versions is going to increase over time. It's 81 as of today. It'll just keep growing going forward. And this provides typically 3 to 5 different views of a place for anywhere on the planet and allows you to lock into a specific version. So let's show a couple enhancements. I think Bern will show off Wayback here in a minute. So I mentioned the imagery enhancements that we've done. So I just wanted to give you a sense for that. So this is a map that's showing the frequency in which the map is used. So it's a heat map showing usage of our World Imagery map. The areas in red are where we get more use than others. So I mentioned we've updated a lot of the map. This tab shows kind of the areas where we've done updates in the last 1.5 to 2 years. So as I mentioned, it's currently over 175 million square kilometers. You can see all the areas that have been updated. In some cases, in fact, many cases, they've been updated at least twice in that time frame. The goal of doing that was to improve the currency of the map. So this is a preview, or this is what the currency or freshness of the map looked like 2 years ago. So green is good in this map. That means it's within spec of 3 to 5 years of currency, which is our goal for World Imagery map. Yellow means it's aging out of that. It's 5 to 6 years old. So you can see 2 years ago, a lot of the map was starting to age out of our spec, and it was over 5 years old. And then orange and red was older than that, six plus years. So after our updates, this is kind of the current view of what the imagery looks like. So you can see it's much greener now than it was before. The vast majority of our imagery now is within that spec target we have of 3 to 5 years. The average age, I think, is about 2.5 years. And this is an ongoing program, so we intend to keep maintaining the currency of the imagery at this level going forward. Bernie, you ready to show us some Wayback?
I am. All right, I thought I'd start with Firefly. Firefly is actually one of my favorite base maps. It's totally cool. So I wanted to show you how to find that so you can begin using it. Here's my default base map right now. I can add and browse the living atlas layers, and I just search for Firefly. You can also find it through the categories as well. When we do find Firefly, we can learn a little more about it by clicking on the title. And at the very bottom of that, you'll see something that says Use as Base Map. So now I've set Firefly as my base map. And this is a really cool base map because you still get that drama and the grain of the imagery, but as you zoom in, it becomes more colorized. So as you zoom in further, you see the full color of the imagery. And Dean also mentioned Firefly symbols, and this map is specifically designed to work with Firefly symbols. Here's world cities. I'll make a quick map, drag and drop. And there they all are, a whole bunch of them. And let's go ahead and let's show the location only. And now under options, when I click symbols, one of the things that I can find is Firefly. And here's all my really nifty looking Firefly symbols. Let's make that a little bit bigger. And of course you can use these for thematic mapping as well, but there's my cool little Firefly symbols on top of the World Imagery base map. The other thing that Dean talked about is Wayback, and we can create different layers of imagery at different vintages using the Wayback app. I wanted to show you how to find that. Here's Wayback, I just typed it in, and I'm just searching. It's not in my organization. Let's search out and let's look for apps. And sure enough, there it is, World Imagery Wayback app. That's how you can find it. And when you open it up, you're presented with an experience that lets you look at the different available vintages of imagery and gives you an idea of what those things look like. There's a little easy button here that lets us look at all the ones that have local changes in our area of interest, and I can just kind of go through all these and take a look at what they are. When I find something I want, I can go ahead and add it to an ArcGIS Online web map. So we just updated World Imagery not long ago. One of the first emails in my inbox the next day was, hey, I noticed you updated, but we like the colors and the other imagery. Can I go back and get that? And the answer is now yes, you can. So here's World Imagery Wayback. I've created some layers from different vintages, so we can go back in time. In this case, we've gone back 4 years to look at when construction was just beginning, and I've added some other layers that show the progress of that construction to this map. And again, this is done through that Wayback application. Another new kind of imagery that we've added is Sentinel-2.
Why don't we hold on that, Vern?
Okay, we'll hold on Sentinel-2.
I'm going to introduce that in a little bit detail, and then that'll be good to show. So that hopefully gives you a sense of our imagery base map. Lots of different views available. The new Wayback one I think is going to be very popular with a lot of users. I encourage you to take advantage. So in addition to the base map type imagery, we also offer other types of imagery, multispectral, multi-temporal imagery that allows you to manipulate the imagery in different ways to get more information out of it. And I just want to quickly go through a few examples, and then we'll show Sentinel as one that we've recently added. So NAIP is a program of the US government, the USDA, Farm Services Agency, has been collecting imagery for the continental United States for many years. And starting in 2013, we published an image service that had the latest available NAIP imagery for the entire continental US, ranging from 2010 to 2012 at the time. And then each year subsequently to that, we've been updating with the latest NAIP. So we now have imagery from 2010 to 2017. Just 2 weeks ago, we published the 2017 imagery. So pretty much for every state in the continental US, you'll have about 3 versions or vintages of imagery available from NAIP that you can do comparison with. And then as I mentioned, these are multispectral, so in addition to the kind of natural color view that we're all familiar with, you can see kind of a false color and NDVI views and get a sense of things like healthy vegetation and so forth. What's next on this is we're going to create a tile layer that's optimized for performance, featuring the latest versions of the natural color NAIP that people have asked for. In addition to NAIP, we have Landsat imagery. This is imagery for the planet that ranges from 30 to 60 meter resolution typically. They do a refresh of the planet about every 16 days. So every 16 days, new imagery is collected of a location on the planet. If it's good quality imagery, then it gets integrated into this service, so you have access to it. And we have imagery going back actually decades for Landsat from different versions of the Landsat sensors that have been available. But we also now have the latest Landsat 8 imagery. So as we collect this new imagery every 16 days, that's appearing in this service. Newer to that is Sentinel-2. So Sentinel-2 is similar to Landsat. Landsat is a US government satellite. Sentinel-2 is a satellite that's being sponsored by the European Commission and the European Space Agency, and it's got some advantages to it. One advantage is it's got a higher refresh rate. They refresh or revisit areas on the planet about every 5 days, not every 15 or 16 days. So you can get imagery more quickly for areas that are changing. They also capture it at a slightly higher resolution. The resolution might be as large as 10 meter resolution for certain band combinations. And then they've also are capturing some different bands, so you can see some types of data in Sentinel that you can't see in Landsat, as well as all the bands that they share. So I think now would be a good time, Vern.
All right, so this is Sentinel-2 imagery, as Dean mentioned. Every place on the Earth is revisited every 5 days. This service is updated daily. It's multispectral and multitemporal, which means I can go back in time. So here we are on June 24th, 2018. This is the Pawnee Fire in California. I can adjust the bands to get a little more information. That's smoke that's covering things, and I can use color infrared. I can see a little bit through the smoke, and I can identify the burn area. But if I use the shortwave infrared, the hotspots really pop. Let's take a look at another example. Dean showed me this one the other day. This is really interesting. So this is an area of Oklahoma. You can see the smoke just streaming off into the distance there. And let's take a look at that with color infrared. So you can see it highlights some of the fire spots there. And if I look at it with that shortwave infrared, it just really, whoops, there we go. It just pops, right? So we can see that. How do we do this? How do we demystify this? Well, let's go back to the original imagery and I'll show you what we can do. We can filter on dates by using a filter. And this one here, I've used the field acquisition date, and I've used is between and April 12th, 2018 and April 14th, 2018. So you can construct the expression that you want. You can look for imagery before a date, after a date, between dates, and that's how you search for things temporally. How do I adjust the colors in that? I come over here to the context menu, the more options, and I come over to image display. And here is where I can choose from a variety of different ways to display the imagery through adjusted bands. Let's look at the shortwave infrared. So let's select that and apply it. And this is exactly kind of what I showed you before. Not quite the same, but you can see how we can do this very, very quickly, look at different dates and use the bands to get more information.
Cool. So Sentinel is available to all of you with an ArcGIS Online subscription account, so I'd encourage you to check that out. Let's switch gears and talk about a couple other categories, and then I'll wrap up talking about how you can participate. We should have some time for questions. So quickly on boundaries, another foundational layer in the Living Atlas is boundary content. We've done a lot of work the last couple of years to expand the offering of boundaries. We have detailed boundaries for the United States, of course, but we also have detailed boundaries for over 130 other countries around the world. We partner with an organization called Michael Bauer Research based in Europe, and they collect detailed boundary data from various agencies around the world, and they make them available as a continuous service that we can provide into ArcGIS Online. And we've also begun to make these boundary layers available to enterprise users. So if you're not an ArcGIS Online user, you have your own portal, you'd like access to the same boundaries, you can now get that beginning with the 10.5 release of Enterprise. You can download the boundaries as service definitions from Esri, and then you can run a script that we provide to publish them within your enterprise environment and take full advantage of them there for visualization and analysis. In addition to the commercial boundaries we get through Michael Bauer, we also offer more detailed local boundaries for several countries that are updated maybe a little bit more frequently. I've listed a few examples there, like for Austria, Canada, Germany, and Japan. In addition to the boundaries, we also publish information kind of on the human geography, demographic information. This has been something that Esri's been doing for many years. In fact, for the United States, we have a team of demographers and statisticians who compile the most detailed demographic data for the US that we update every single year. So just last week or 2 weeks ago, we introduced our 2018 updates for our demographics, which are a mid-year estimate of demographic characteristic for several thousand variables for the United States, as well as a 5-year forecast for many of those variables. In addition to that detailed US demographics, we also provide demographic data from Michael Bauer for about 130 other countries around the world. So you have access to that through the ArcGIS Online platform as well. This is premium content that's available in online, and as you pay for it through service credits. And it's quite affordable. To give you an example, for making maps, like you can see there, it's 10 credits per 1,000 map requests, which is about $1. So it's quite affordable to deliver maps into your organization or to enrich your data with demographic variables. One of the other foundational layers that we have kind of in our environment category is elevation. So elevation is an essential ingredient to a lot of the apps in the ArcGIS portfolio. So we've been building for several years now an elevation map of the world that we compile from various best available sources, public domain sources, some commercial sources, and we blend them together into an elevation data set, a DEM of the world basically at multiple resolutions. And from that we produce various information products. We have live image services like what Bernd was demonstrating for imagery, but with elevation data, where you can look at different views like slope or aspect or tinted hillshade or multi-directional hillshade, and those are just raster functions that we apply on the fly to the elevation data. So as we update the elevation data, those views automatically benefit from that. We also deliver it in optimized formats for 3D visualization. So if you want to look at our data in ArcGIS Earth or the scene viewer in ArcGIS Online and Enterprise in 3D perspective, we use our elevation data to extrude features on the ground and give you that 3D perspective. All of this data is freely available to you with an ArcGIS Online subscription account. One of the enhancements we announced last year at the user conference was we were licensing data from one of our partners, Airbus. They've built a global elevation data set that's higher resolution and more current than the SRTM data that's been available for several years. And so we've, in the last few months, have integrated this into the world elevation data set that we maintain. So we now have more detailed and broader coverage of high-res data. So it's 24-meter horizontal accuracy, which improves upon the SRTM data, but more importantly, it's 4-meter vertical accuracy. So you get a lot of improvements, such as in this little animated screenshot there with the SRTM data. In urban areas, it was kind of bumpy, so the buildings would float or sink sometimes with that quality of elevation data. Now with the Airbus data, it's much smoother in these urban areas, so the buildings sit comfortably on the terrain as you would expect them to do. And then in other parts of the world, you'll notice significant qualitative improvements. So this has been built into our elevation data set. It's been released into our image services, our analytics services, our 3D elevation services, and it'll be part of these other tiled services here very soon. So that's a kind of a whirlwind tour of our content portfolio. There's a lot more that you could learn about that. There's other sessions this week, and you can also visit us in the Living Atlas Island down in the expo to learn more. Wanted to wrap up with just a couple minutes on how you can participate if you'd like to share content, and then we'll have some time for questions. So the Living Atlas community really has two types of participants. There's contributors. These are individuals or organizations who are sharing data that's featured in the Living Atlas. And then there's curators. These are individuals who are actively reviewing content that's been nominated for the Living Atlas, accepting content, or working with the potential contributors of the content to fix any issues, and then organizing the content in the Living Atlas. We have a team of curators at Esri in our Redlands office who are curating different themes for the US and the world. And we actually have people around the world at our various Esri offices, like Esri UK, Esri France, Esri Japan, who are curating content for their respective countries. So they're all looking to provide access to the best available content for use within the Living Atlas. The main reasons why organizations would like to participate in the Living Atlas, one is to improve the visibility and accessibility of their content. A lot of organizations are publishing content, that's their mission, their mandate. They want to make it broadly available, but they don't have necessarily the amount of attention on it that they'd like. So getting it into the Living Atlas is one way to raise the visibility of your content, through tools like Bernd was demonstrating earlier. In other cases, organizations would like to publish their content, but they don't have the infrastructure to do that. So they've asked if they can share their data with Esri and have it included in Esri content that we publish, like our imagery map, as I mentioned earlier. So we have a program for that called Community Maps.
So I just want to show you real quick how you can submit your contributions. It's super easy. Go to the Living Atlas website, livingatlas.arcgis.com. Sign in at the top of the page. I've already signed in, and then go to My Contributions, and it scans your items and it grades them for you. It's also a handy tool to just kind of look at how you're doing. You have to hit 80 points, and let's see, this one certainly didn't, but it tells me why. So I need to improve the thumbnails, I just finished a workshop earlier, so these are left over from that. But obviously I need to add a summary and a description, so you get some little hints about how to improve it. It also takes a look at your content, and then you can go ahead and edit it and make improvements. And once you've hit the mark, you can hit the Nominate Now button. It gets submitted where Dean's team of curators takes a look at it, and off you go. So super easy to do.
Cool. Thanks, Bert. So yeah, this is kind of summarized here. So one way to participate is by sharing your content through online. So that's really simple. Create an item in online, follow our best practices for sharing. There's a link there that goes to our help doc that explains that. There's some sessions that Bern and I are doing that talk about that in more detail. And then like Bern just showed you, nominate that through the Living Atlas contributor app. If you'd like to participate through community maps, you can look at our website, the Living Atlas website, find out the types of data that we're accepting into community maps. There's a number of maps, imagery map, topo map, street map, ocean-based map, elevation maps that we're supporting contributions for. And then you can register your data, tell us what data you have, and then either upload that data to us, or if it's too big, we'll ship you a drive and you can ship it to us. Or if you have a live service, you can register your service and then we'll just harvest data from your service on some interval that you tell us to and bring that into the platform and publish it out. So multiple ways to participate. Before we wrap up, just a reminder, if you could give us feedback on this session, it would be great. It helps us improve it for going forward. So you can do that through the contributor app. And with that, I think we have some time for questions. I'll just leave this up on screen for any other sessions that you'd like to learn about more on the Living Atlas. So, any questions that you folks have? Yes, sir.
Yeah, given the amount of satellite imagery you have, you guys showed kind of the visualization aspect of it. But can you use that in ArcPro for a classification, a multi-spectral classification of a subset of images?
So the question was, given the amount of imagery you have, can you use that beyond the visualization for things like classification and applications like Pro? Yes and no. So you can certainly use our imagery base map in Pro, and you can do feature data collection in Pro for that. The base map is optimized for high performance display. So it's serving hundreds of millions of tiles. So it's been converted into an RGB, JPEG image format that doesn't have access to all the source pixel data that was in the imagery. That's where those other services like NAIP come into play, where we have exposed the raw pixels and you can do more analytics with that type of imagery. So not with the imagery base map, but yes, with other services that we have. And then there are some other imagery maps that we provide in multispectral format. I won't show them today, but in our Road Ahead session later today, I'll show you some examples of that. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Can you comment on feature services with vector data? Now that Pro is getting used by more people, use it in analyses and things like that instead of storing it on our servers?
Right. Yeah, so the question was using feature services in Pro, can you use that for analysis, and how does it compare with this? So a lot of the data that we publish now, we are publishing as feature services. And like you said, feature services are more powerful than tile services are, because you can access the raw geometry and the attribution. So a great example of that would be our boundary layers that I mentioned, and also our demographic layers. Those are available as feature services. So you can bring them into Pro, you can bring them into the online map viewer, and you can do spatial analysis in both of those apps with them. You can dissolve features, you can enrich them with other variables, you can append your own data to them, and then the results of that are also a feature layer that you can use. And you don't have to download the data. You kind of alluded to this. You don't have to download a file geodatabase or shapefile. You can just do that against the live service and do the analysis in the cloud if you're using online. And then the results of that are stored in the cloud, and then you're just streaming features from it. So feature services are a great way to use vector data, and they support not just display, but analysis. In some cases, we take vector data and we optimize it for display only, like with vector tiles. But it makes it more performant for display, but less functional for things like analysis. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I support a lot of older users. Any chance this is going to go into desktop in any way? Without having to do a direct link or like the vector-based maps?
So the question was use of this in desktop, in ArcMap, I assume specifically. So a lot of the content I showed you is consumable in ArcMap. What we don't have in ArcMap is a custom user experience for browsing the Living Atlas like we have in Online and we have in Pro. And that's not likely to change. But the base maps, the multispectral imagery, the feature layers, all those services are consumable within ArcMap, and you can bring them in your map documents and store them. You can also do a lot of the geoprocessing types of analysis. I would say 90% of what I showed you there is consumable within ArcMap. It just doesn't have the same discovery user experience to it. And if you'd like to look at a couple of specific examples, that you're interested in, you could come to the Living Atlas Island and we could show you using that within ArcMap, kind of what the experience is for that. But basically what you'd be doing is searching ArcGIS Online, looking for the content we described here, and then adding that as a layer in ArcMap, and then you can save it in your MXD document and share that as you need to.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes, sir.
Is LiDAR data available, and so can you do analysis?
So the question was, is LiDAR data available, and if so, can you do analysis? The answer is yes. Part of our world elevation map is including LiDAR type elevation data that we've gotten. And yes, you can do analysis on that like you can the other DEM data that's in the elevation map. We are also publishing, or beginning to publish, some LiDAR data as scene layers in ArcGIS Online. So it takes advantage of the ability to build an integrated point mesh, so you can do more visualization of it. So it's more visual analysis than spatial analysis, but we're also supporting LiDAR and kind of 3D perspectives as well. And there'll be some more conversation about that in the road ahead, and some things we're doing I can't talk about now that will be interesting next year. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you plan on going back further than 5 years for the Wayback app?
So the question was, do we plan on going back further than 5 years on the Wayback? Probably is the answer. We wanted to get it out there with the 5 years to get feedback on it and see how well that's working. Some of the imagery that we had over 5 years ago, we don't have permissions to serve now. So we're going to have to sift through some of that older imagery to see what we can and can't publish without me getting in a lot of trouble. So that's one dimension. And then some of it had to do with the formats of the data. So I think it's going to be demand driven. So if there's interest from the community, that people are really loving the Wayback stuff, but they want to go farther back, we'll kind of work on those issues. But yes, it's possible. And then the other question I got, which I think we'll do, but I haven't figured out how yet, is for imagery that is older, that we never had in the imagery map, can we somehow get that in the Wayback map? I think there's interesting opportunity there. We'll have to think architecturally how we make that happen, but I think we'd be open to doing that too. Yes, sir.
Is it on the vector base maps, is it at all possible, maybe if you're setting this up, to turn off labels?
So the question is, on vector base maps, is it possible to turn off labels? And the answer is absolutely. You can definitely do that. So in some cases, labels are their own layers, and it's as simple as setting the visibility from true to false on those layers. In other cases, they're an attribute of another layer, and you can turn off the labels. So some of our base maps are labelless, like we'll have a vector base map with multiple layers in it, and one layer will be labelless and the other layer will have all the labels. So in some cases you can just turn off the overlay that has all the labels. But if that's not available for the map you're interested in, you can always crack open the JSON and turn off all the labels. And again, that's an area of, if you saw a map that you thought would be really useful in a labelless form, send us some feedback. We might just add that as a style so everybody's not doing it themselves. We could just do that for everyone. Yes, ma'am.
The Landsat 8 imagery, how soon after it's collected do you have it in your service?
Good question. So the question was, how soon after Landsat 8 imagery is collected do we have it? I would say it's typically within 48 hours. We're partnering with Amazon Web Services for that. So they are hosting the full repository of Landsat on AWS. And so essentially, as soon as it shows up in AWS, it shows up in our service that same day. But I think it typically takes about 48 hours for it to get from the sensors into the AWS environment. Yes, ma'am.
Can we extract the vector data like building footprint or the shape data?
From which service are you thinking?
The vector or the feature?
Okay, so the question was, can you extract the vector data from our services such as the vector base maps or other ones? With the vector tiles, the answer is no. The vector tiles are designed for visualization only. And I won't go through all the details, but basically we're converting the data from its raw vector format into a highly optimized vector format that's just there to display really quickly and beautifully. But we strip off everything from it that we don't need for that purpose. And it's not meant for downloads. It'd be really difficult and not contractually permitted to kind of reverse engineer that. But in other cases where we have building data, like the OpenStreetMap example, we're serving the vector data. We will be serving it in its native format. And that's a good teaser for our Road Ahead session for the Living Atlas later today. I'm going to show you something in our Road Ahead that really answers that question very specifically, and something that we're planning to do here in the next few weeks. Any questions? I think we've got time for one more. Yes, ma'am.
Probably out of topic. The word cities they do drag and drop into the map. So it was like an Excel spreadsheet.
The question was on the world cities. Is that?
Yeah,
Drag and drop into the map.
it was a CSV file. Yes.
Yeah.
So in this case, so I'm assuming there is online geocoding. So is that like consuming credits when you directly?
Okay, there's two things that happen, and pardon my voice. That file has lat long in it, and I just dragged and dropped it on the map. And with lat long, no credits, no nothing. There's, nothing. With addresses, you can do up to, what is it, 50, Dean, as I recall? There's a limit. If you want to do like batch addressing, you do pay credits for those address matching. Yes, you do pay credits for that.
Yep.
The lat long is free. Yeah.
So as long as you have lat long, there is no credits.
Right. Your other option is you can set up your own geocoder in your organization. If you use the Esri World Geocoder, then there's credits consumed because of that, but some organizations actually make their own geocoder, and then there's...
So you can set up your own and then you don't consume any credits.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, you're kind of, if you're using our online geocoding service and you're going to store the results of your geocode in a database or in the map, then you are doing geocoding and you'll pay credits for that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.